All right, Bridget, looks like we've got everyone in if you want to get us started.
Oh, okay. Hello and welcome. This is kind of funny not seeing everybody, but I'm going to assume everybody's here. I'd like to say welcome. My name is Bridget Garabedian. I'm the new legislative chair of MASC. This is a new position for me. I've been the chair of Division 1. I'd like to introduce, this is Anthony Andronico and Sean Costello. I'm sure you've seen their names. I'll let them introduce themselves and their titles. I'd also like to say hello and welcome to, if Glenn Kuchar is here with us, I assume he is, our executive director, and Denise Hurst, our president, any of our board of director members who might be here with us as well, and any other staff members with MASC. I know that we have many members of school committees with us here tonight, and also some superintendents and a few executive secretaries. So it's nice to see everybody coming together. And I think when we all work together to get this work done, that's when real impact happens. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go along, and we'll try to answer them when there's a natural pause. I think it'll make the most sense to answer questions that way. But if we can't get to them that way, then we will get to them towards the end. So right now, I will let Anthony and Sean speak a little bit about what they do. They're staff members with MASC, and if you guys want to speak a little bit about what you do with MASC.
Sure, I'll get us started. I'm Anthony Andronico. I'm the MASC Operations Director and Lobbyist, as it says so on the slide in front of you. As a bit of background, I was up at the State House for 6 years as a Communications Director for Senator O'Connor, and also spent some time on the Quincy School Committee during COVID, and also subsequently was a city councilor in Quincy, aka I went to the dark side for a little bit, as some people have mentioned. But I've been with MASC for 3 years now, and happy with the work that I do, and happy to work with a guy like Sean. So I'll pass it over to him.
Thanks, Anthony. I am looking at the attendee list, and I do know many of you, but for those of you who I don't know, I'm Sean Costello. I am one of the 4 field directors for MASC. My district is Eastern Massachusetts, so if you're in Eastern Massachusetts, south of Boston, you are in my district, and I'd be your field director. As you can see, I'm also one of the lobbyists for MASC. I've been with MASC for about 2 years, but prior to working with MASC, I spent over 10 years working in the House of Representatives up on Beacon Hill as Chief of Staff for State Representative Bruce Ayers from Quincy, who is now the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Education. I've been on the Marshfield School Committee for 11 years and have been the chair of that committee for quite a number of years now. But absolutely love this work with MASC, and absolutely love the opportunity to serve as one of your lobbyists on Beacon Hill, representing the interests of school committees across Massachusetts with Anthony and with Glenn, and of course with Bridget.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, our next slide. So we've broken things up to kind of make things a little more digestible into 3 compartments for tonight's session. First being the FY27 budget, what it means for K through 12 education. If you've been reading any of the material that's come through earlier at the end of the spring, early summer, Anthony had put together a nice letter after the governor had signed through the budget, and Anthony had put together some information there. So this will go a little bit deeper than that tonight to kind of break that down a little bit deeper. Next, education policy items that crossed or nearly crossed the finish line. So we have a few items there that we think might be worth discussing tonight. And then education policy items that made notable progress, and some things that maybe need to kind of be revisited or that we're hoping maybe come back in January. So we'll kind of talk in 3 separate sections. First, with the FY27 budget, what it means for K through 12 education. A couple things I just wanted to mention going into that there. Anthony's going to touch on this just a little bit more, but what happened here is we saw with a 63.42 billion total state budget, almost a 4% increase over the FY26 GAA. We had with the General Appropriations Act, the budget includes a significant long-term policy win, the creation of a new 29-member foundation budget review commission. MASC is going to have a seat on this commission. And so over the next, a little bit of years, up until October 28, when that report is due, Any recommendations that would increase the state cost must identify the resources needed to support those changes. The commission is required to hold at least 4 public hearings across the Commonwealth, and they may also review other educational finance programs. So as Anthony is talking about the next couple of slides, I'd like you to keep in mind this commission and the impacts that might have.
Before I get into stuff, I know Sean is going to go into the nitty gritty of some of the numbers for the budget, so I'll let him talk about that.
Yes, thank you. And obviously, folks, the Chapter 70 is, as it says there, the core of school funding in Massachusetts. You saw that number of what the state budget is that Bridget just explained, but you'll also see here that a big chunk of that goes to education aid. As you can see, $7.66 billion in the FY27 budget has been earmarked for Chapter 70 aid to local school districts. This represents nearly a 4% increase over the FY26 budget, which is a really great thing. As you can see there, this is the final year of the Student Opportunity Act scheduled funding phase in, which means that act that passed, Anthony, I think it was 2018 when we were both still there.
That is correct.
Yep. So the 2018 Student Opportunity Act is in its final year of funding phase, and that impacts a lot of districts differently, but that's a really good thing as well. As you can see, that budget represents a minimum aid increase of up to $160 per student. This is up $10 from the FY26 budget. So the FY26 budget had a per pupil aid of $150. This FY27 budget has $160. And as you can see, there are approximately 84% of Massachusetts school districts are projected to qualify for minimum aid in FY27. Just some other major funding that's connected to our districts, the circuit breaker. Special education circuit breaker. There's $806.6 million in the circuit breaker. This is a 10% increase, which is really great. You can see that there's $654.6 million of that in the operating budget, and then a supplemental budget was passed that included $152 million in supplemental funding. Charter school reimbursement is up just 0.7% from $199 million to $200.4 million, and unrestricted general government aid is up $40 million to $1.36 billion, which is a really great thing as towns and cities across Massachusetts are facing tighter budgets on the local level, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, many of you understand.
Just a note on that for policy and the UGA line item. So the $40 million increase, there was a policy change that was included with that. $10 million of that 40 will follow the same policy up to this point, but the remaining 30 will actually be divvied out based off of population on a per capita basis. So just a little bit of a nuanced policy change for, I guess, municipalities moving forward. I'm not sure if that will continue, but as a note for folks.
So some other major educational investments that have been made, as you can see, in transportation funding, $153.8 million in total, $58.4 million of it in aid for school transportation, $57.2 million in regional transportation aid, $35.2 million in McKinney-Vento transportation, and $3 million in aid for out-of-district vocational transportation. There's other funding that came in for school meals. This maintains the universal free school meals program that has been implemented in Massachusetts for the last 4 years now at $180 million. $20 million in rural school aid. This $16 million is in the FY27 budget, and then there's another $4 million in the supplemental budget. This represents a $4 million increase over last year's FY26 budget. As you can see, though, the Special Commission on Rural Schools identified $60 million annually as the need, so there's still some work to do there. You can also see that there's still some work to do when it comes to pre-K. They've given $15.5 million to the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative. This represents a $5 million decrease from last year in the FY26 budget. And then there's some new and targeted investments as well. Some of the new initiatives. There's a $4 million investment in the English for second language speakers reserve. There's $1 million going to cell phone free public schools grants. There's $16.5 million going to regionalization and shared services grant program. And then there's other continued investments as well. You can see early literacy and high dosage tutoring are each getting $20 million, which represents level funding from last year. And the METCO program received a $1 million increase over last year, which to $30.9 million, which is a few $1,000,000 shy of their full funding ask.
All right. So thanks for going over the numbers, Sean. But in addition, in the FY in the new budget, there were a couple of outside policy sections just of note for education policy. So there were three sections related to special education transportation. And overall, the goal of these sections, as you can see on the screen, is to sort of promote more transparency within the industry, allow districts to have better data to go on so that when they're looking for special education transportation contracts, that they better understand the marketplace overall. Part of this is based off of the recommendations from the Inspector General report on special ed transportation that came out a few months ago. And this has been one of the areas that I know MASC as an organization and from our membership has been focused on related to transportation costs as a whole. So we were happy to see this within the FY27 budget. In addition, the big policy win, as Bridget had mentioned at the beginning of the session, was the Foundation Budget Review Commission. And just the brief notes about what that will mean. It's a 29-member commission. MASC, the MASC president will be the representative for us on that commission. There will be 4 public meetings at least spread across the state. The commission will have a little bit more leeway than the one that was established 10 years ago to look at other education finance programs, which is something that we're pretty excited for in particular and what that might mean for us. And then in addition, any recommendations that will increase state costs the commission will have to identify the additional resources needed. And that report will come out in October of 2028. And what that will mean in terms of a timeline for implementation of the recommendations is that the entire next legislative session will most likely not make the same type of progress on the issues that this commission will touch than some would like, ourselves included. So when we're talking about the other education finance programs, there are a few things that get looped into that. So as Sean had mentioned, the rural schools recommendation, or the commission had recommended $60 million in funding. And this year's budget, we got $20 million. And moving forward, I'm not so sure that the legislature is going to want to focus on that particular issue, knowing that the Foundation Budget Review Commission is also going to look at that particular issue. I believe there's a representative on the commission from the Economic Development Office that is focused on rural schools, the rural development, that will be on the commission. So like that issue is at the forefront. Other issues when we just talk about Chapter 70 funding as a whole, one of the things we went over this past session was the inflation cap. So that 4.5% cap for Chapter 70 funding or year over year, we were looking at, trying to do catch-ups. We were looking at trying to remove the cap overall. Well, my guess is the legislature isn't going to want to touch that issue, knowing that they're reevaluating the funding formula overall. And sort of similar pathway with, voc tech capacity. There was a great announcement from the administration recently, and I think it was 80 million plus on expanding voc capacity for a select group of vocational schools throughout the Commonwealth. We're happy to see things like that, but when we look at maybe the funding formula related to MSBA programs and what's the reimbursement rate for voc tech schools, this is sort of the avenue where a lot of those outstanding questions and main drivers of the focus of some of the initiatives we've tried to get across the finish line, this is the commission, and this is sort of the avenue the legislature is going to point us to over the next couple of years. But it is a big win, and it's a big opportunity for education policy and funding in Massachusetts, and we're very, very excited about it. So now that we've gone over the budget stuff, I do just want to check in, Sean and Bridget, if there are any questions in the chat related to the budget, or in the Q&A section, or if we're good to just move forward.
We're good to keep going, Anthony. We have no questions in the chat.
All right. So, education policy, items that crossed or nearly crossed the finish line. I'm going to turn it over to Bridget for a couple slides.
Yeah, no, I haven't, no questions. I do want to add to some of the budget to tie up at the end there. I don't think that, to add to what you said, Anthony, I don't think that changes the advocacy that MASC will still have, though, given the fact that I think we still have, the commission that's still doing the work. I think that's going to still keep MASC on track with our advocacy.
Absolutely, because
if anybody's concerned that it's going to change our direction, or concerned that it would slow us down.
Well, while over the next 2 years, while the commission's doing their work, I know our president will certainly be advocating for that, and we'll be up there reminding the legislators that we still need to address all of these issues, like with specific to like the Rural Schools Commission, for example. It wasn't just funding that was in that report. There were plenty of policy items in there, and same thing with vocational technical school capacity.
Right.
So
transportation and all that, right? So
all that will
right.
continue.
Right. Thank you. And student literacy. This was actually signed late June, around the 26th, I think it might have been. But this was an act relative to teacher preparation and student literacy. So there's some work that's I think it's going to be done in some districts over the next year or two. Now that this has been signed in, with K through 3 reading curricula, districts must select K through 3 reading curricula that's backed by scientific research that has been proven to improve student competency in reading, vocabulary, oral language, and comprehension. It also requires DESE to develop a free, high-quality K through 3 literacy curriculum that will be available to school districts across Massachusetts. Early literacy and dyslexia screenings. The legislation codifies dyslexia and literacy screening requirements and requires schools to develop screening protocols for potential neurological learning disabilities, including dyslexia, and annually report their screening practices. It also requires school districts to assess students' reading ability and review the achievements progress at least twice per school year from K through 3. Teacher apprenticeships and prep programs. The legislation expands the registered teacher apprenticeship program to support paid teaching apprenticeships in high needs districts. It also supports DESE's expedited review of teacher education programs to ensure that they use evidence-based literacy training. So stay tuned. In some districts, I think this might actually be some work for some districts coming ahead. With the PROTECT Act. This also was signed late June. There are some districts that have already put and implemented a lot of this work as well. This here was some guidelines that was handed down by the governor and the AG last year. And then again, there was quite a bit of information that was shared out as well. The legislator then codified it this year. So many districts should have some procedures in place already. This is an act promoting the rule of law, some oversight, trust, and equal constitutional treatment regarding bars, civil immigration arrests without a judicial warrant at schools, child care centers, and other sensitive areas. So this means in schools, it directs that the public will receive multilingual guidance on responding to enforcement encounters, confirming an officer's credentials, and understanding their rights. It prohibits state and municipal participation in immigration enforcement. It keeps state and local police out of federal civil immigration enforcement, bearing the use of local resources for that purpose or detention, and it's based solely on civil immigration detainers. So this will also direct DESE to develop model policies in consultation with MASC and others. So this is listed in the actual legislation. So stay tuned. I think there'll be some work for MASC coming up to be issuing some policy work on that as well. And the freedom to read law. I think this is
all right.
Anthony?
Yeah, this is a fun one. This was signed yesterday by Governor Healy, so I'll do my best to go over it, but we'll spend most of our time on that bullet point in the bottom right. But let's just start with what the bill actually does. So the first thing is setting expectations for school library materials. Has to be age appropriate, serve an educational purpose, codifies that, you can't, school staff or your librarian can't bring personal views into the selection process for the books themselves. Second part requires that local districts craft the policies. Considering it was signed yesterday, I don't think MASC has a model policy just yet, but I know it's another item that I get to hand off to our field director team and say that we need a model policy on. Uh, but it also loops in, the American Library Association standards and the Board of Library Commissioners and the Mass Library System as partners in development of policy for our school committees as well. Collects the data, so there's a report that, districts will send to DESE about what challenges did you get, what were the books, who challenged, etc. And separately, the Board of Library Commissioners will also consolidate and put a report together every year for the legislature so they can sort of understand how the functionality of this law has gone. Holds librarians harmless, so protects school staff basically that they are not going to be held civilly, professionally, or criminally liable for the items that they place on the shelf, even if ultimately those are taken off of the shelf long term. So I'd say the most important piece of this legislation is that last bullet, setting the threshold for removing a book. So the book itself, it's in the school library. It can only be challenged by school staff, parents or guardians of students in that district, or students themselves. Okay, so not just a general member of the public. There needs to be some level of attachment to the district itself. So once a book is challenged, that book stays on the shelf until it has been through the formal review process. It'll have a public hearing. The public hearing will be of a select review committee of local school personnel who would look it over again and decide whether that material is either, should be on the shelf or not, looking over educational, literary, artistic, personal, or social value. If it has that, it'll stay on the shelf. Or if the book is simply just not age appropriate, it can also be removed from the shelf. So at that point, after the review committee, then the school committee votes on whether to remove the challenged material after that public hearing has happened. So local school committees are going to have less direct involvement in deciding whether a book stays on the shelf or not. And then that last part is that appeals to the school committee decision are allowed. Only students or parents or guardians of students can challenge. So even further, school staff can't challenge. So separating that out again, and that challenge would go to superior court. So that is the freedom to read law. There will definitely be a policy follow-up. I do see a question here in the chat.
Yeah, Anthony, I can
Katrina.
answer that if you'd like. I see it's Katrina Delaney's question, my friend Katrina from Pembroke. Katrina, I would absolutely suggest to you that you wait to see what MASC comes up with as model policy, because we typically work with DESE and with whoever else to make sure that that language is cleared. And like Anthony said, this bill was signed just yesterday. So we'll take a little bit of time to make sure that we get the language right, and we will disseminate it to all of the committees in as timely of a fashion as we can. But I would say that my suggestion would be to wait for the model policy, because then it would be more in line with all of the other policies that we've written. It would be vetted, and it would be done the way that we typically do it.
And to piggyback, there are a few more bills in here that we'll have to send out policy updates on. I know the Protect Act was one that we just mentioned too. So I know the team will have their work cut out for them.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Katrina.
Let's see, what else? I know Bridget wants to talk about cell phones and youth social media.
Okay. So sorry if my the chat open here. So this has actually been now in conference committee. We've been hearing a lot about the cell phone bills, and I think there's been a lot of opportunity for people to weigh in and give their feedback on this. So right now, the House and the Senate each have bell-to-bell bans, and direct districts can create their own policies in both of these versions. So the Senate would require that DESI would approve each district's cell phone policy. The version would create exceptions for medical needs, IEPs, disabilities, and accommodations. The House would instruct DESI to provide guidance, recommendations, and a model policy and not approve the policies individually. It would also create DESI to run pilots in 10 districts to test technology that renders devices inoperable on school grounds. Right now, for example, I can think of at least a couple of districts that are using technology out there right now. Social media, the House would block those under 14 entirely and require parental consent for 14 and 15-year-olds. LGBTQ plus protected status data would be shielded from parental approval process. And the Senate does not have an age restriction, but strips out addictive features like autoplay, infinite scroll, and algorithmic feeds. Senate also removes location sharing for minors by default. So just tweaks in what the House and the Senate have in in their bills. And so in conference, I would imagine they're going to come up with some sort of a bill that's going to be a version of both of these. So we'll see what January looks like. There are a couple of questions that maybe we could get to at the end because I think we missed them that are not related to where we're at now.
I do think that we have the answer to those. Sean and I have been touching base.
Yes.
You're good?
Sean, take it away. We'll read the question
Sure.
from
We're going to
friend
take them out
Sarah.
of order here. They're both from Sarah Hathaway. Sarah, thank you. The first question was on the transportation funding. Do you have a percent increase over the previous fiscal year? The graphic showed this year's numbers only. Sarah, in looking that up, it appears, and we've just perused last year's FY26 final budget, it appears that increase was a roughly 9.8% increase, about $13 million. And that includes an additional $6 million this year over last year's McKinney-Vento funding. But in total, that's about $13 million.
All right. And then Sarah had also asked about, what other organizations have seats on the Foundation Budget Review Commission. A lot of it is legislative filler to a certain extent, to put it nicely. I have my phone in front of me. I'm going to go through the list as best I
Spoken
can.
like a true former staffer, Anthony.
Hey, it is what it is. So you've got, the Senate and House chairs on the Joint Committee on Education. You have the Secretary of Education, the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Ed. You've got the Secretary of A&F, Administration and Finance. You have a representative from the Department of Revenue's Division of Local Services. You have the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, or their designee, the respective minority leaders in the House and the Senate as well. You've got the Ways and Means chairs, and then you get into actual organizations from there. So you've got someone from Mass Municipal, someone from MASC, from MASS, the Mass Business Alliance. You've got our friends from MAVA, the Vocational Administrators Organization. We've got the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation. So there are a few others sprinkled in. It is notable on that commission, though, that I believe the AFT is a member of the
AFT has a
commission,
seat, yes.
but through the conference committee process, the Mass Teachers Association was removed as a member of the commission, and the reasoning as to why is my understanding behind closed doors between House and Senate negotiators. So that is a question for them. But MASC is very happy to be on the commission, and we're looking forward to it. Katrina has just followed up. Are there any students or teachers on it? The answer, again, for the commission is that there is a representative from the AFT, and that is the only direct answer for students or teachers. There are not any students on the commission. There are not any organizations who represent students in that way, where a student would be on. And again, for teachers would be just the AFT. And I know our president-elect Beverly Griffin Dunn will do a great job
Yes,
on
she
that
will.
commission. She'll have her work cut out for her for sure. All right,
We are well represented.
absolutely. Okay, so I know Bridget wrapped up cell phones and youth social media, and let's see what we have next. Bridget, data privacy and child welfare legislation.
So we have a couple of different things here. One, data privacy. We have there's S 2619 and H 5479. This is in the conference committee. The House and Senate versions would each ban the sale of children's data, prohibits all entities from selling minors' personal data, and block targeted ads for minors, prohibits companies from collecting or processing a child's personal information for the purposes of targeting ads. So that's one that they're looking at. The other one, child welfare, which is H 5629. That's an act enhancing child welfare protections. That's been laid before the governor. So that right now is kind of a little closer to having some action, creating a DCF education unit tasked with academic monitoring, support, and coordination with school districts. It would require that DCF and Department of Education establish clear enrollment timelines, record transfer standards for children in DCF custody who move schools. It would create a commission to examine a digital education portfolio system. So this I think is a little bit closer. This would, I guess, have some impacts for school committee members in terms of, again, policy work.
Right. And we'd put these into just, this is more overarching school districts, FYI. And even the data privacy versions that are in the conference committee, they do a ton of other things. But these sections specifically sort of relate to the youth social media and the cell phone issue. So we figured that we'd tie that in as each of those provisions as is are in each of the House and Senate version and will most likely happen as we move forward.
Okay.
All
So
right.
Teacher Retirement Plus. This is another big issue that is just about at that finish line. Not exactly there yet, but seems pretty close. So as you can see, Teacher Retirement Plus is an enhanced pension program for public school educators. It was introduced in 2001, but unfortunately, when it was introduced, a lot of teachers experienced a pretty confusing enrollment process and started to look back on it and say, boy, do I wish that I had enrolled in that. So after some confusion, back in August of 2023, a judicial ruling made it clear that the legislature needed to fix that issue. So some legislation was filed and has moved forward through the process. It's now in conference committee that allows educators hired before July 1 of 2001 who didn't initially participate in Retirement Plus to have that second opportunity to enroll themselves in Retirement Plus. The conference committee is sorting out all sorts of different things that come with that, which eligible job titles would be in, any opt-in windows, and how that buyback is calculated. But this bill would give an estimated 6,500 to 8,500 educators another opportunity to enter into Retirement Plus, which for my money is a really good thing.
And as an additional note, it's possible that if and when this happens, that some districts may be looking to fill some positions as
Right.
some more teachers and or nurses, depending on how that job title works out.
Yes.
Maybe looking for, yeah, they might be retiring. And then in
Also,
terms of,
Anthony, just kind of on that note too, if you don't mind, because you mentioned the nurses, Folks on school committees should be aware that you may hear from your school nurses asking you to advocate for their inclusion. The school nurses have a very impressive, rather organized campaign that they've been putting together to ensure that they're included in that as well. I remember that from all the way back when I was working in the legislature, and folks who were working for me were receiving those calls. So that's absolutely something to keep an eye and ear out for as well. So again, it's not something that directly pertains to school committees, but it is definitely something that school committee members should be aware of, especially if your school nurses or your educators reach out to you about its status or their inclusion in it.
Right. So, and all the public school teachers are all part of the same state retirement system, with the exception of our friends in Boston. So when we talk about a fiscal impact, it could be on Boston specifically, those teachers retiring, you may see an additional movement, but otherwise for districts at large, we're just talking about filling those positions themselves.
Right. So another one of the sections we'll talk about today is there are some items that, because the wheels of the legislature move rather slowly sometimes, items that made some notable progress, items that didn't exactly get to where we hoped they would get to this legislative session, but items that nonetheless did move forward in the process and may have stalled at a certain point in the process. One of those is the financial literacy curriculum. The establishment of the financial literacy curriculum and the funding of the financial literacy curriculum. As you can see there, it was unanimously passed in the House in October, and it has since been referred to Senate Ways and Means and has not yet been moved in the Senate. As you can see, it permits the uses of funds for development, procurement, and distribution of financial literacy curriculum and materials. It allows for professional development for educators, like trainings, seminars, conferences, and other materials. DESE would be responsible to provide access to curricular materials on financial literacy. It would be responsible for offering professional development opportunities on financial literacy. And it would also be responsible for some annual reporting on the status and progress of personal financial literacy instruction. And again, before I keep going on, this is the House version of the bill. It is always very possible that the Senate version looks quite different. And for those of you who don't speak legislature very well yet, especially those of you who are new, something that's important to note is that when a bill passes the House and then is referred to the Senate, or vice versa, it eventually will make its way to what's called a conference committee. And that conference committee is in charge of working out the differences between the House and Senate versions to pass a final version, which then needs to be approved by both chambers once more before it is passed on to the governor. So just wanted to throw that in there, because all of these things that we're reading on this one are simply the House version of the bill and not so much guaranteed in the Senate version of the bill. So the bill in the House version mandates instruction for all middle and high school students. It covers personal finance competencies along with emerging financial technologies. And it also creates a financial literacy trust fund to support middle and high school personal finance education. This is a really good bill that MASC has been actively supporting. I also should point out that the lead sponsor in the Senate on the bill is Anthony's former boss, and Anthony worked quite extensively on this legislation in the Senate during his time in the Senate. So if that bill does get across the finish line, first of all and foremost, it's a very good thing for students across Massachusetts, but also it's a great victory for MASC and a pretty good personal one for our friend Anthony. So hopefully that's something that we see happen in the next session.
I appreciate that, Sean. As a note, as I feel like it's timely, Sean had worked in the House and I had worked in the Senate, and we like to joke that on Beacon Hill that sometimes those are the two main political parties up there where, they trade off, well, okay, if we do financial literacy, will you do this instead? And they're always butting heads up there, but they usually find a way eventually to work out some good policy. So this is one, though, that we've starred for next legislative session that we're hoping we can get across the finish line, now knowing that the House has fully passed this, and we're hoping that our friends in the Senate will do the same next session.
Yep.
All right. I think this one is me. We're talking about reserve funds overall. So our friends Rep. Lenatra in the House and Senator Oliveira in the Senate had filed each of these in their respective chambers. So the first one, an act relative to special education reserve funds. As I'm guessing most of you know, is that you can set up a special education reserve fund right now. At this moment in time, it allows you to put 2% of your funds in annual net school spending in that fund. This legislation would very simply move that number from 2% up to 5%, as I know most districts are feeling the financial impact of special education tuitions year over year. I know a lot of our superintendent friends have talked about that and just the rise in costs and unexpected costs in particular. So the House version made it to third reading, which is basically the step right before the full legislative body takes a vote on the legislation itself. And unfortunately, the Senate version didn't quite make it out of committee. It had been stuck on the Committee on Rules. We're in a little bit of a transition period when it comes to when the end of formal session officially happens. Typically, it would be July 31st of an election year is when the legislature historically has said we're not taking up any more business. In a post-COVID world, they have sort of amended that language to be, well, we're not going to take up anything new that hasn't already made it to conference committee, that we're already not actively negotiating. So if that trend holds true, the bills that we see here that we're going over now would have to be taken up next legislative session. So on that note, another bill related to reserve funds was an act relative to a regional school assessment reserve fund. So this would be a net new reserve fund that would authorize districts to set up the regional school assessment reserve fund to put about no more than 3.5% of funding, limits the fund balance to 10% of the municipality's annual regional assessment and you can use the funds when the regional assessment increases by more than 3.5% over the prior year. So I know this is one that we're looking forward to getting across the finish line next session as well. All right, I think Bridget was going to do this slide. Just want to check in. All right, Bridget might be having some technical difficulties, but I think that we can cover this one. So, membership on the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. This one was sponsored by our friend Rep. Altrino and Senators Jalen and Roush in the Senate.
Former MASC member, Representative Altrino.
That's correct. I believe as well as Senator Jalen,
That's correct. Yep.
life member. So anyway, so that legislation also, again, made it to third reading and didn't quite get a full vote of the House. So I'm going to have to lean on Sean next session to tell his friends in the House to take it up and go from there. But effectively, the legislation would allow practicing educators and school committee members to be on the board. Currently, that is not allowed. We feel as an organization that changing that law to allow for that type of representation would overall benefit the board and, as a result, education policy as a whole within Massachusetts.
I'm happy to take the next one, Anthony, on mandatory recess. That's one of the fun ones there, an act relative to recess for elementary and middle school students, which would require at least 20 minutes of uninterrupted, supervised, safe, and unstructured free play recess per day, and not allowing it to be excluded from structured learning time requirements. This is obviously because of the belief that clearly Representative Marjorie Decker and Senator Patrick O'Connor have, along with whoever else their co-sponsors may be, that kids learn better when they have that outlet, when they have that recess outlet. That legislation is pending a vote of the full House, meaning it made its way through the Education Committee and then through whatever other committees it was referred to thereafter, and then committee in third reading, and has been placed on the calendar for the House to consider. In the Senate side, it was sent to a study. A study is effectively the way that the legislature says this bill is not going to move forward this session in this chamber. So that bill, S417, was sent to study. However, it will be interesting to see what, if anything, happens with this bill next year. And I do see our boss, Glenn Kuchar, on here. Glenn, this would be fun for us at work too. So that is just something to consider, some mandatory recess, not just for the kids, but it could be good for everybody.
All right, final report of the statewide graduation council. So we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the final report itself or the position paper that MASC had published related to all of the different sections on the graduation council itself. However, it is important to note just where is this process? Because I know we've had some questions about, all right, the report came out, so now what? And this little paragraph here is the only mention about what will happen moving forward in the final report about where do we go from here. And basically, the gist is it's on the governor and the legislature and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education to formally implement these recommendations from that final report. And I would also be remiss if I failed to mention that our immediate past president, Jason Frazier, served on the graduation council. And he would also be very upset if I failed to mention that the final report, the final recommendations, are the recommendations of the chairs and only of the chairs of the graduation council. So although there was a council made up of many members and many voices, they did not have final say over what the final version said, just the chairs did. So that is the
Which goes against
information.
everything we teach.
So that is the information. That's how it was set up. But as things progress and move forward, we'll obviously be monitoring what happens with policy development, where those developments happen, and keep our membership updated for that. We'll make these slides available after the presentation. So we've hyperlinked here to the position paper, the specific webinar briefing that we did give on this that delved into the position paper, the final report, all that fun stuff.
Bridget, are you back, or would you like one of us to take this? I think she's having some technical difficulties, so maybe Anthony and I can double team this one. If you're interested in stepping up your involvement with MASC, which we really hope you are, we're your professional development organization, we're your advocacy organization, we hope that you'll join a committee. There's a lot of different committees that the MASC Board of Directors has report to them, and one of those would be the Legislative Committee, which Bridget so ably chairs, and which is why Anthony and I have the pleasure of working with her on all of these issues. Some other interesting items of note: please, please, please do your very best to attend our annual conference, which is this November 4th through the 6th in Danvers. It's a new location for us. We're very excited for it. Those of you who have been before, which I recognize a lot of your names from it, can hopefully attest to the fact that it's a very valuable networking experience, very valuable learning experience, with a lot of different workshops, a lot of different keynotes, and just all sorts of different activities to familiarize yourself with the latest in public education in Massachusetts and some best practices that are happening in some other communities aside from yours. We may have some potential future webinars coming up. A federal legislative update could be incoming, especially after things may change at the federal level in the next few months, and how to advocate on the local level, which is obviously something that's very important to all of us. Anthony and I will be working to keep an eye on what the delegate assembly passes. As you can see there, the delegate assembly will take place that last day of conference in Danvers. Every committee has the right to elect the delegate to delegate assembly. Resolutions will be voted on at that delegate assembly. Anthony can probably speak better to that than I can because he kind of coordinates that with our office staff. So, Anthony, what else did I miss?
You don't miss much. Just for potential future webinars, considering all of you have so far taken 50 minutes of your time on a Tuesday in August. We really appreciate that. If there are topics related to legislative work that you want us to take a look at, that you want a webinar on, you want more information on, if you reach out to us, we'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one, or in addition, actually set up another webinar on this, because usually how it works is if you have questions about it, someone else does too. So that always helps inform the work that we do. And as you see at the bottom there, we're talking about developing priorities for the next legislative session. A lot of that will depend on how the delegate assembly goes, and what does membership tell us that we should focus on. That is how our policy process works. Sean and I and the board, and Glenn, our executive director, and Bridget, our legislative chair, and the legislative committee don't just pick issues, we don't throw darts at the dartboard and say, all right, well, I guess that's what we're supporting. It all goes back to membership and making sure that we're doing what membership would like us to do. So this fall and winter, as we get ready for the next legislative session, we'll be working together and collaboratively to develop sort of an action plan and a priority list. And the next big item that we'd have is Day on the Hill, which will either be in March or April of 2027, where we're actually up on Beacon Hill advocating for specific priorities. And I do see our friend Bridget is back. I know she might be a little frustrated with the tech difficulties, but we're glad you're back. Bridget, we are just wrapping up. I don't know if you wanted to
I'm
say.
sure you guys did a great job, and I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. But anyway, I saw all the slides, and I'm sure you covered everything that was in it. I just want to say, for anybody who's interested in being a part of, the future sessions and being part of maybe some smaller sessions, whatever you guys have covered, for anybody who wants to sign up, it would be great to get together and have smaller discussions. Maybe, reach out to your division chairs, reach out to these guys, reach out to me, and let's get things started. So we can have some bigger conversations, and so that you can start advocating, like you probably have already mentioned, as full school committee members or as individuals. So that's it.
All right. If there are no other questions in the chat or discussion, always wait a second.
Anthony, just really quickly, I know we called out Glenn earlier as our executive director. And for those of you who are on here, if you have any questions on any of this, you can obviously reach out to any one of the three of us. You can also reach out to Glenn, and you can reach out to your field director. And we also should just mention Pat Francomano, our legal counsel, is on here as well. And we're very lucky to have Pat working with all of us on these legal issues, especially kind of pertaining to the question that we heard earlier about policy and whether or not to wait for MASC's model policies. We work on those with our own in-house legal counsel as well.
And I do also see a few of our division chair friends from the board. I know Bridget, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that I've got Division 3 chair Barbara Davis from Holbrook, right? And I see Beverly Griffin Dunn, our president-elect, on, and I see our vocational technical division chair Charlie Ellis with us, and a few other names. I know I see Robin, who is the Division 3 Secretary Treasurer, as well on. So I just want to thank our board members and division officers for joining us. And I want to thank all of you for spending your Tuesday evening with us to go over some legislative updates and budget updates. So with that, I think we'll give you 6 minutes back of your time. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Good night.